first of all, this has nothing to do with the presentation, but I won it in the silent auction. I'll be damned if I'm not going to wear it at least once, and I'll probably never wear it again. So.
Looking dapper.
Who said that?
Very dapper.
Thank you.
Splendiferous.
So I'm glad that you were here. Most of my very favorite and dearest Haiku Canada friends are here for the Haiku Canada launch of this wonderful book that Claudia produced for me. And you'll see when you get a chance to look at it afterwards. The artwork on the cover, the way she set it up, the color of the paper, it's just a beautiful, beautiful production. So I'm glad you're going to be here for the official launch of the book. This book all started over 30 years ago. Over 30 years ago, this box, this is not the real box, unfortunately, I distressed it. So it would look like a 30-year-old box, but I've long since thrown that box away. Well, come on, it looks pretty good.
You addressed your sartorial presentation and you distressed the box.
Exactly. Very versatile. But, yeah, this box came to me, and this box contained photographs and negatives, which I brought something you can look at later. It was filled with old photographs, negatives, letters, many, many letters, all dated 1905, 1910, 1915. Yeah, some of these still have the original postage on them. It came with magazines, Prison Monitor. I mean, well, I think the main character of this story, Celesta, was a Seventh-day Adventist, and I think part of their mission was to go into the prison. That's the only reason I can think of why she would have the Prison Monitor. And various little magazines like this. And the box and the surrounding area where the box was found was just filled with like loose scraps of paper. You can see that even now they're falling apart. They've been eaten by obviously some kind of rodent, whether it was squirrels or mice, I don't know. Just lying everywhere. But the most important part of this is these 8 journals that I found. These journals were written between the years of 1905 and 1916 by a woman whose name was Celesta Taylor. And the journals tell the story of this man named Henry Miles. Henry Miles was her first cousin. Henry Miles, about 1898, became a widower. His wife died, and he was left with 2 sons, young sons, maybe 10 years old, 10 and 12, something like that. And he had no way of dealing with this because he had to work all day, so he engaged his young 16-year-old niece to come and be an au pair and cook and take care of the boys. Unfortunately, she became pregnant by Henry, and a young baby girl was born named Evelyn. And as soon as she was born, Henry kept the baby and she went back to her family. So now Henry, this is about 1900, has two sons and this newborn infant, which he can cope with even less than before. So he turns to his cousin, Celesta Taylor, their first cousins, and he asks her to come and move in with them as a housekeeper and mother for these children. Now for Celesta, she had also recently been widowed 4 or 5 years before, and she had 2 older sons, Clifford and Albion, who were away at school. And she had really no significant way of earning an income. It was very hard for a woman in those days, unless you were a school teacher. There just weren't that many jobs. So she was virtually penniless. So when this opportunity presented itself, she just jumped at it. It was a gift from heaven. So she thought, you know, she moved in with Henry and the family. All of a sudden she had a place to live for free. She had room and board, so she had no expenses. And he paid her well at the beginning because he was a businessman. He owned lumber mills, and he was fairly well off. And there are entries when you hear some of the readings from the journal, from her journal, sent $50 to Albion, one of her sons. Now $50 in 1910 is, you know, probably a couple of $1,000s today. So if she had that kind of money to send to her children, it meant that Henry was paying her a decent salary and she had zero expenses. So if that's where the story had ended, it would have been a very happy ending story, you know. Unfortunately, it didn't quite go the way things planned. In the first place, Henry, as I said, they were both Seventh-day Adventists, and Henry gets a calling. He thinks what he should do is become a preacher. So he sells his mill, sells all his land, takes the money, and decides to go out and look for a calling. He's traveling around looking for a calling. Unfortunately, he wasn't that good at it. He was not, you know, charismatic. People did not like him. There are many entries. I think there's one you'll hear tonight. People did not really like Henry, and he couldn't get hired on anywhere. So the money that they had at the start of this story begins to dwindle, and by the end, Celesta is lending Henry money for postage so that he can write to different places. So it takes a dramatic turn. The second thing that went wrong for Celesta is she fell in love with Henry. They were first cousins, but she felt that they could still marry, and you get the impression from the journals, and it's very hard, all we have is her words on things, and there are huge gaps, but the feeling you get, and he kind of confirms this a little, is that they were actually talking about marriage at some point. That doesn't happen, as you'll find out. So now Celesta, virtually penniless, bringing up these children, and madly in love with Henry, and he realizes he's made a mistake by encouraging her, and yet he can't totally discourage her because she's now become the mother of these children, especially Evelyn. The only mother Evelyn has known is Celesta. You know, she was virtually a little, she might have been a few months old. These boys maybe remembered their mother, but she truly became, you can see it in the journals, that they loved her and she was their mother. So she had no choice, but when Henry leaves at a certain point, you'll hear in the journals, and becomes involved with another woman, she's trapped in that house. She can't just abandon these kids and go away. Henry seems to have no interest in them, so she's trapped in this house. And essentially that's the background story. I want to give you as much as I can before we start, because then once we start I don't want to stop to have to explain things. But just a couple of other things that you need to know about the journals. Before Celesta was hired by Henry, she was scrambling to make a living. She took in sewing, she raised canaries to sell, and there's one of the entries talks about the last of my birds died. She had these canaries that she would raise, and the final one died, so she had no birds left. And the other thing that she did is she was, I don't know if you would call her a holistic kind of herbalist, or she made medicines from tree bark and the sap of pine trees. And there are entries where she goes out with Evelyn and they're gathering different roots and things to make medicines, which she sold, which is good. It's a lot of things that she talks about way back then we're still doing today. Unfortunately, she also got caught up with an element of quack medicine. We talked to her. We are so fortunate. I don't want to talk too long about this, but when we found these diaries, there were huge gaps. When you read the diaries, you're trying to understand, are these people married? Who are these 5 kids? There were huge gaps that we couldn't figure out from the journals. My sister, through a stroke of just pure good luck, drove down to the eastern townships of Quebec. Now, if you don't know the townships, it's south of Montreal, and today it's cottage country. But in those days, it was farm and lumber. So my sister Rena went down, started knocking on doors, literally knocking on doors blindly to see if she could find anybody that knew Celesta. And the third door she knocked on, this woman answered the door and she said, "Hi, we're doing a project on this Celesta Taylor. You wouldn't know anyone who knows this person." And the woman said, "Oh yeah, I'm still writing to her son Albion." Wow. So Rena couldn't believe it, and so she said, "Well, I'll write to him and I'll find out if he wants to be in touch with you." Now at this point, Albion, this is 1970 something, I don't remember the exact age. Albion at that point was in his 80s, late 80s, but fortunately sharp as a tack, and he, again by coincidence, had been making a chronicle of his family history to give to his kids and his family. So when Rena, my sister, contacted him, well, first of all, he was stunned. His mother died in the 1930s. This is 1970 something. He probably hadn't thought about his mother. He had no idea that she kept journals or diaries, no idea whatsoever. So all of a sudden someone writes to you and saying, "Hi, I've got your mother's journals." He was dumbfounded. Fortunately, he responded so well. He was so excited about the project. He was an amateur photographer from the time he was a teenager, and a lot of the photographs, I'll leave them there so you can look at the map. These are photographs, not this one, but that he took of his family, his home, his brothers, and he opened that totally up to Rena. He let her have access to all his photographs. He gave us a chronology of his family, and he started filling in the we would never known about this illegitimate daughter of Henry's if he hadn't told us. We just couldn't figure out who was who, you know. So, and he was the one who, because we heard about this resuscitator and this oxygenator, which you'll hear about, which are in the journals, and I Googled them, had no idea what the heck they were, and there's nothing on them, strangely enough. So he said, "Oh yeah, Mother had those things," and he said, you know, it was total quackery, but she got taken in. But it was a way for her also to make money. One of these things is a gadget that looks like a lipstick tube with a pin in it and a spring, and you would put it on and pull the spring and it would make pinholes. A little like acupuncture probably today, but she was just doing it randomly. I don't think she, you know. And the other thing, the oxygenator was a battery which gave you an electric jolt. And again, if you've ever had therapy for a sore arm, they still do that today. They put this TENS machine on you and they give you. So, I mean, I don't know how far over the line into quackery it went and not, but I'm just mentioning this so when it comes up in the reading tonight that you'll know what it means. The other thing that I have to explain, which surprises me every time I read this, every now and then in her diary, she'll say, December 14th, X. You know, I knew instantly what, at least, you know, it was strange from a man knowing what this means. I thought, people will get this. And yet every time I ask people, what do you think this X means? And they don't get it. Anyone have any idea why she would write X in her journal? What is it?
Yeah, she was having a period.
Exactly. She was keeping track of her menstrual cycle. And to me, women still do that, you know, today. They have a calendar, especially in those days where you were not using birth control, probably other than the rhythm method. It was very important to know. And Celesta, by the way, is a little older than Henry. So again, it's probably a little more important to her at that age to know if she's regular or not, you know. So it comes up several times in the story, so I want you to know that before we start. The other thing you should know is that towards the end of the story, Henry falls for this. At the start of the story, Henry is 27 and Celesta is 40, which is probably another good reason why. It's another good reason why it was probably acceptable for her to move into his house and not cause a scandal. She was an older woman, like 13 years older than him. So aside from being first cousins, it was also like, okay, this is safe, you know, and she was a widow. Okay, I'm just about done. So towards the end, and now I guess the gap stays the same, but as Celesta gets older, I guess he begins to lose interest. And he falls for this young woman named Blanche. And in her journal, Celesta refers to Blanche as beauty, and she refers to Henry as chameleon, because, you He changed his stripes. There's an entry in the journal, which I don't think it comes up tonight, She says, I saw Mrs. So-and-so. She's even more homely than I am, if that's possible. So, that's her opinion of herself, and yet, she married once. She had Henry interested in her up to a point, and even in these journals, she's getting marriage proposals from other people, so she couldn't have been quite as homely as she thought she was. But it did obviously bother her that she called Blanche Beauty. So the only other thing you need to know is that the way the book is structured is that every page has a journal entry from Celesta followed by a haiku. Celesta's journal entries are totally unchanged by me. I edited them to get the most exciting, interesting parts, but I did not change one word. What you're going to hear is exactly how she wrote it in the journal. The haiku are mine, but they're written not as me commenting on Celesta's journal. I tried that at the beginning and it didn't work for me. It wasn't working. So what happened is I tried to put myself in her shoes, reading the entries, and then trying to imagine what haiku would she have written at that time if she had been into haiku. So when you hear me reading the haiku, try and imagine it's Celesta, not Marco's haiku. It's Celesta's haiku.
Henry gave me this diary, an old one of his, so I like it better than a new one. December 18th, 1905. Henry's surgical operation. December 20th, Henry sat up a few minutes. December 21st, Grandpa died. December 25th, Christmas, plodding about as usual.
Boxing Day. I light the fire with wrapping paper.
December 30th, 1909. I am so wretched and tired of all that belongs to this earth. Visited a while with Henry this evening. I had a long cry and I talked to him of my heartaches. He tried to comfort me. I feel like a sour apple, and it's hard to feel different. I presented Henry with a New Year's gift, but he would not accept it.
Moonlight on ice. The farmer carries heavy rocks in his dreams.
February 28th, 1910. The resuscitator arrived. But I am sad. I wish I could fly. Henry came awful glad to get home. He could hardly express his joy for home again. A little evening talk brings us disappointed hopes like livid corpses that rise up to haunt me and will follow me for days and days. I was ill nearly all night and I only slept about 2 hours. I have put in a wretched day thinking, and thus ends this month.
After the argument, pieces of myself in the broken mirror.
August 25th. Sucking raw eggs. Dug more roots. Indian hemp for dropsy. How the summer is just speeding away. I like to see it go, although I do not know what time is bringing to me. I wrote a letter to Henry. My heart for thine.
Almost autumn. Finding a plum that the squirrels missed.
April 16th, 1911. An awful day with Henry. He is desperate financially and I think socially. He looked so careworn and bad. Took care of Grace's baby from 11 to 4 so she could go to Magog to see the doctor. Used Oleum on the baby for whooping cough. On the chest and the back and bowels. Used oxygenator for the first time.
A butterfly settles on one of my weeds.
July 11. X. The first for nearly 2 years. I have breathed too much turpentine is the reason why. String beans, our first returns from the garden, still awful hot and no rain. I went to Newberry's because the baby Genevieve was very low with pneumonia. I sat up all night with it. The baby died about noon. I laid it out. The first person I ever laid out. And then I walked home. 2.5 miles. July 14th, the funeral at the house. Quite a lot there. I helped with the singing, and then I said with the children, and I tried to divert their minds by picking flowers.
Breathing. Watching her breathing.
December 6th. Our white rooster and 2 lovely hens were stolen. The door was left open. Elder Tanner called and heard Henry's letter. I did not enjoy his remarks too well regarding Henry's future work. He seems to have little faith in him. I went to Mrs. Sargent's funeral, a glowing but untrue sermon. All gave Henry a cold reception, and he returned with a heart of stone. December 25th. I made pies and cakes and donuts and things for Evelyn's stocking, which she hung up last night. Henry is very kind and tender toward me.
After the funeral, the children making snow angels.
January 1st, 1914. As wishing each other a happy new year under such circumstances would be almost mockery, there were few such remarks. It is mostly awful weather and the hens' legs were going to freeze, only Henry put them in the heated grain box. My last canary died with sore feet and diarrhea. It's the last one I have, and I've been without a bird for 30 years. I can take the white of eggs beaten with lemon and could water the only thing my stomach will retain.
New Year's Eve, behind the jars of preserves, a broken cocoon.
June 24th. Ella called to get the rest of Florence's pay. I did not have it for her, so it affected my heart quite badly for some time. Evelyn commenced to X. She was bathing and was frightened, so she called me.
Shy girl watching the cocoon.
May 28th. Virgo and her husband came. He wanted to borrow the oxygenator, but I hated to part with it. Besides, he is too far gone to be helped with anything. I feel afraid of him or anything he has touched. I like him ever so much, although he is not very brilliant. May 29th. Cleaning up after the tuberculosis guest. Evelyn and I went to Carvale Woods for leeks. We got leeks, snake root, and wild turnip.
Newly widowed, she waters her flowers in the rain.
October 2nd. Rainy and so gloomy. Oh, if I were only differently constituted than to be like this fond and affectionate, trusting female that longs for love, home, and to make someone my equal, happy with my love. This learning to live alone is awful.
In the evergreen, an empty nest filling with dead leaves.
October 13th. Sent an overcoat to Henry. I'm tired and I am lonely. Evelyn sits up and is much better. I went alone to the post office. Sister N urged me to go back with her, and that I did, and had a good chat, little dreaming I was carrying in my hands written words that would give me another death blow. But oh, they do not kill me fast enough, for I long to rest from it all. The last complaint, no freedom.
Rereading your letter, a moth circles my lamp.
October 19th, 1915. Henry came on the 11 o'clock, much to our surprise. He acted cold. I knew too well that his love and interest were being placed on another, besides those of the home nest. He just kissed us both when he first came and expressed no pleasure at seeing us once again. After a while, he came and embraced me, but I could see such a difference in every way. I rushed on with my work, but with a heart of lead. He keeps his grip locked up because her letters and picture is in there. Never before has he kept that locked from me.
Train whistle, the smell of mouthwash in his kisses.
October 20th. I look like death. Ever since I got that first letter about that girl, we thrashed things out and we talked about it. He has an interest in that girl most of the day. I am too frantic to be contained within these walls. He admitted that he loved her, and he had kept company with her for 2 months. Said he didn't want to come home, but would have to starve in the streets if he could not get home. We had some pretty hard words. He claimed that he had been, as he believed, led by God to bestow his attentions on her. Evidently, he had forgotten his promise that he would never do so until I was liberated, so as to see other scenes and faces, not here, where everything reminded me of our past associations. Oh, this cruel world. How can the human heart be so?
The leaves are gone, and half the moon, too. But I am still here.
October 22nd. I took some opium, which stupefied me for a while. He thought I was dying in his arms and tried to have me open my eyes and look at him, but I was too exhausted to make the effort for that. He never mentioned taking me back after I came out of my bad spell. I have prayed for years that if I were not God's will for us to marry, he would take that love from my heart, but still no help. And I am left to wonder what is right in God's sight about it.
Both with our feet in this freezing river, our eyes meet.
November 24th. Snow came last night, dreary and cloudy. I dressed and came down to the dungeon below. I cared for all the vegetables as the rats were eating them, corked up the doors, brought in the flour barrel, puttered all day. I looked in the mirror for the first time since 10 days ago. I looked like a walking corpse. As I saw my wasted form, flesh that had but a few weeks ago was hard and solid, now hangs on my frame like rags, I said, nothing short of murder, but done slowly.
Winter funeral, breakfast and supper in the dark.
February 3rd, 1916. Parliament buildings burned. No letter from Henry yet. 15 days silence. How cruel. Too busy, I suppose. Evelyn read to me this evening. I could not sleep until past midnight and looked like death in the morning. Dreamed that they were having a court over me and were going to put me behind bars, then freedom would be theirs. A cold day. Heard the first crow. It sounded pretty.
Snowstorm. Once again, the birds disappear.
July 1st. A cloudy day. Just met my saddened heart. I picked dandelion blossoms for liver trouble. I only take sour milk for nourishment. I wrote to Henry an awful letter, but he never answered it. I begged him to come home in my half-crazed state. I wrote to Beauty, begging her not to take my Henry. No reply. July 2nd. Got the letter I expected, but it was so icy that it nearly killed me. He haunted me all night. I slept very little.
Night of no moon, I light every lamp to read your letter.
July 3rd. The awful day. He stands up and promises vows that he can only partly keep. I hope that his future will be cursed, but that he will be saved in the new earth where we can meet as the angels are. I wonder what the angels are recording for Henry and the others this day. I hope yet that his grief will surpass mine, if that can be possible. I dressed all in black, and I wrote some to Henry on mourning paper.
Alone in my bed, moths cling to the screen.
December 3rd. Slept but little, dreaming all night about chameleon and beauty. I mopped some, baked honey bread, brown bread, johnny cake, biscuits, oatmeal crackers, potatoes, and turnips. My dear cousin Arvila dropped away with heart failure. I shall miss her much in this lonely world.
News of her death. Each snowflake melts as it touches the ground.
December 5th, 1916. An awful day. Storm and blowed fierce. I melted snow to drink and cook with. I had to shovel to get to the road. Dear Arvila looks as natural as life. I was left alone with her for 2 hours. I felt her face, her hands, her arms, and I cut some of her hair. The funeral was at 10:30. No sermon, only a service. Letter waiting for me from Henry.
Your name scraped in the window frost, my fingertip so cold.
Russin, New York, December 3rd, 1916. Dear, precious Celesta, words are inadequate to express my joy on receiving a letter from you written by your own hand. I recognize the canary tracks at sight, which you know always looks good to me, though they have expressed awful sentences against me in the years you wrote to Blanche and her mother.
But I know you really did not intend to wrong me, and I have ever stood up for you, taking all the blame to myself. Now, regarding the letters of which you speak, dear Lessie, you must know that I would withhold nothing from you that I thought would really comfort you and would not be turned against me. But while I'm sure that when in your right mind, you would do nothing to injure me or cause me troubles, others might. And these letters were misinterpreted and sent here, as you know, for the express purpose and hope that they would disgrace me and debase me in the depths of hell. Hence, can you wonder that I propose to hold on to them for at least a little while longer? I have not destroyed them, but in justice to myself and the one who has chosen to share my troubles, I feel that I should retain them rather than taking the chance of having those who have turned against me manipulate them to the furtherance of their own evil ends. Now, I've just returned from a trip to Buffalo and other important cities in search of a position. Blanche furnished the money. Well, on our return, her mother tells me that she received a letter from someone who signed it Clifton. The letter ran me to the lowest notch. She said that its contents were so ridiculous that she just burned it and did not want that I should tell Blanche anything about it. She said she could not think that one in his position and profession would have actually written such a letter. For if all in there was true, there was no use in telling her or her daughter what a devil she'd married after it's all over. Hence, she questioned that he actually wrote it. And you know, Celesta, such letters hurt you and Clifton as well as I. For they would reason that if I'm such a devil, why should you remain in my house so many years? She wouldn't tell me what the letter contained, but she said it was very rank. Whoever wrote it must have been short-sighted not to see how it would hurt them as well as me. Now, of course, I told Blanche about Evelyn, but she would annihilate anyone who would be so mean as to tell her people. She has no reproach on her name whatever, and her people are very proud. Hence, we hope that the letter contained nothing of that kind. However, you know, Clifton did write to me at a time when it did seem that I should die of grief over you and my debts. And he compared me to Balaam, and he started twitting me of my debts. I am sending you the letter. You'll note that he requests that I never see you again. But unless you protest, I hope to see my dear Lel many times, again and again, and to tell you of the interesting things that have transpired since last fall, and to visit again with my goodness. Oh, Leslie, you must not give up hope in God. You'll understand it all someday. If you're faithful, you'll see why this awful experience was permitted. Bitter as it has been for both of us, I know it's all for the best. And I have not been controlled by mere fancy or sentiment either. Forgive me for my imprudence of years ago. But bless me for freeing you from an unhappy life in bonds that we never should take together. Yes, I burned all the letters which I did not care for others to read, but I've already told you that before. Now, regarding the hay, yes, sell it and send the money to Williamson, or use it if you need it, which of course I know you do. There is no harm in you using it. Of course, I appreciate Tenny's watch and care over you, but do not appreciate the way he acted for everyone concerned, including himself. He thought to injure me, but instead, he would have lost all their respect had I not vindicated his cause. I was praising him while he said all he could to kill me. And they do not think much of him as it is. He doesn't see that as long as you people are all related to me and have known me for years, that to write such things hurts us all. Now, as yet, I have no position, but I still hope on and pray that soon I may be able to send you some money to relieve you there, for I fear you are suffering for things. Yes, and my darling Evelyn wrote me saying that she was no longer my dear girl and that I should never call her such. What more must I endure? Now I trust you will be able to stop grieving over the past. Well, I cannot write more, for I must go out and help with the hay. But you well know that I sympathize, love, and pity the poor faithful one who is still the apple of my eye. Though I have no disappointments in Blanche, I hope that this will be understood. Lovingly, Henry. Thank you.